Years ago, I waited for a clear spot in traffic so I could turn onto a highway. Suddenly, I was slammed from the rear by a teenager who got distracted by another teen in her car. In the weeks that followed, almost everyone I knew tried to find some reason why I was at least partially responsible for the accident. It was disconcerting for them to learn that it had happened to me through no fault of my own. I began realizing it was scary for people because if it could happen that way for me, it could happen that way for them. Perhaps this psychology is partially the reason why our culture so sadly blames the victims of crimes or other problems for what happened. We want to believe that we could avoid it ourselves if we were just good or careful enough. We don't want to believe what Jesus made clear. The rain falls on the righteous and the unrighteous. The sun rises for the just and for the unjust. Now, most people hear those words in the context of the negative things that happen. Ironically, even if we don't believe that God makes bad things happen. A story says that Alexander the Great came to a people in Africa who lived in a remote area and knew neither war nor conqueror. Alexander wanted to know their manners and their customs. While he visited with the chief, two citizens entered. "I bought a piece of land from my neighbor," said the first man. "While I was digging a trench, I found a treasure. This is not mine, because I only bought the land. Yet the former owner of the land will not receive the treasure back from me." The defendant answered, "I hope I have a conscience as well as my fellow citizen. I sold him the land with all it holds, and thus the treasure is his." After some thought, the chief suggested that since one had a daughter and the other neighbor had a son, perhaps they should marry and the treasure be given to the young couple for their start in life. "Well, don't you think that's fair?" the chief asked the surprised Alexander. "What decision would be made in your country?" "Well, to confess the truth," said Alexander, "we would have seized the treasure for the use of the king." "For the king!" exclaimed the chief. "Tell me, does the sun shine on the country?" "Oh, yes." "Does it rain there?" "Of course it does." "Wonderful, but, are there animals in the country, ones that live on the grass and the other plants?" "A great many live there." "Oh, that is the answer," said the chief. "It is for the sake of those innocent animals that the sun continues to shine and the rain falls upon your country, because its people are clearly unworthy of such blessings." God doesn't cause the sun to rise only for the good and proper folks. The rain falls upon all of us to nourish and sustain. Jesus looked at this truth and saw important implications for it in how people should treat each other. Now, to love one's neighbors and to hate one's enemies seems to be regarded as a natural law by many cultures. The ancient Israelites defined their neighbors as people like themselves. Ask a Babylonian or a Persian or an Egyptian, you'd found the same idea. My neighbor? Well, that's the guy who worships Marduk at the temple in Babylon with me. My neighbor? That's the woman who washes clothing beside me at the Nile. Many of the Jewish prophets and religious leaders tried to expand the concept of neighbor to enemies as well. And it was hard going, because it's really easier to care about people who are like us, who worship the same way we do, and who live in the same style. We have much in common with them, and they tend to make us feel good about our life and our choices. I've often wondered whether this was at the heart of some religious persecution, perhaps all of it. Do some people persecute others because the existence of different beliefs or styles of worship calls into question a faith that might be ultimately a little unsure of itself? It seems to me a secure faith surely does not say, "I will prove my beliefs are right by hurting someone who has a different belief." In other words, surely we can witness to our beliefs, we can disagree with the beliefs of others, but just not think that our real faith is threatened by what anyone else believes. For Jesus, there were no limitations on our concerns for others. We were to love even our enemies. And for the proof of this as a maxim, he looked to the natural world, and he pointed out that even the stinkers get the sun and rain to sustain them. God doesn't withhold it from them. It's easy to love good people. It's easy to love the people who make us feel good by being like us. It's easy to love the people that provide some benefit for us, even if it's just the fact they love us back. So of course we greet our friends, our relatives, our associates. The worst people of Israelite society did the same. That is, Jesus said, the tax collectors. And the Gentiles, who had no faith in Yahweh, they did at least that much. But Jesus was pushing us to get closer to God's nature, which is to love others regardless. This wasn't a concept that said love someone so they will become your friend. That does happen sometimes. Read a story of a Jewish woman who heard that a former leader in the KKK had moved to her community. He was sick and he was friendless. She wanted to hate him, but tried to help him. He became a close friend and ended up rejecting his previous prejudices. How wonderful is that? There was a man at a conference some years ago who told a similar story about 3 men who moved to a small community. He wanted to dislike and judge them, but instead he became their good friend as they sickened with AIDS. He was the one whose heart grew. All 3 of these men died in his arms, and he rejoiced in their friendship. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could count on that being the result of love and of friendship? But Jesus knew it didn't always happen that way. It wouldn't happen that way for him. By the time Matthew was writing down these words of Jesus, it was clear that the Christians weren't going to love the entire world into friendship either. The Romans were still going to toss many of them to the lions. But Jesus said, if we want to choose God's way of doing things, we're going to have to love anyhow. Be perfect, he said, even as God is perfect. Now, when I was going to be ordained, that issue of perfection really bothered me. We're supposed to answer it as a part of the ordination. Are you going on to perfection? To say yes seemed less than humble. To say no would have been counterproductive to my goal of becoming a church pastor, and I didn't want to lie or take it lightly. All I could think of was the fact that only God is perfect. Even Jesus wouldn't let people say he was good, just God. There's no getting past these words that we are to be perfect even as God is perfect. It was helpful for me to read something about Wesley's concept of going on to perfection. In today's world, we think of it as an absolute standard in all things. Wesley saw it more as being perfected in love. But even to be perfect in love is not something most humans could honestly say they had attained. I finally decided that the question was more about the direction I was choosing rather than an evaluation of how much perfection I had achieved. But that leads us to another subject. It's been popular in recent years to say that our choices are more important than our abilities or our success at what we choose. A popular young adult author points out that it's our choices that define us. And then we might ask, what about that road that's paved with good intentions? We do believe our intentions matter. It's the thought that counts. But let's face it, this is also sometimes used as a cop-out. You probably remember times when someone said they intended to be helpful, but they were actually cruel, rude, judgmental, even cruel. I know other times when someone sincerely did their best, wanting with all their hearts to do good, and something bad happened or someone took offense, and sometimes the rest of us couldn't figure out how it happened that way. We have no easier answers for this, nor do I think a one-size-fits-all approach will work. Intentions matter. Results matter as well. One thing I'm seeing out in the world right now is that people are looking at Christians with sharp eyes. They're noticing when we fail to live up to our goals and our ideals. I do not think the answer is to choose a lower standard. Jesus knew we probably weren't going to achieve perfection. They still called us to choose that as our daily goal. and he was willing to die in the pursuit of the best we humans have to offer. We might miss the moon, but let's aim for it anyway and give it our best. Amen.